dump it all. Crypto nana, exit liquidity hodl nana, dump it all.
Crypto nana, exit liquidity,
dump it all.
hodl nana, dump it all. From the day we arrive on the blockchain and blinking step into the trade, there's more to lose than can never be won, more to dump than can never be saved. Influencers, tweets, and the noobs all follow, buying high, selling low at a game. But the boomers know, and Sailor, he knows that the dump is coming. It's all the same. It's the circle of exit liquidity, and it moves us all through despair and hope, through faith and FOMO, till we find our place on the path unwinding in the circle of exit liquidity. Some of us fall by the wayside, and some of us soar to the stars. But the influencers always win with the Lambos and their cars. So beware of the pump and the inevitable dump, for the cycle continues and the news get wrecked. Nana, exit liquidity, hodl nana, dump it all. Crypto nana, exit liquidity, hodl nana, dump it all. Crypto nana, exit liquidity, dump it all. Hodl nana, dump it all. It's the circle of exit liquidity, and it moves us all through despair and hope, through faith and FOMO, till we find our place on the path unwinding in the circle of exit liquidity. Dump it all.
There will be no real non-controlled currency in the world.
We're coming for you, Banks.
Listening to different podcasts, like in a whole different reality, which they think completely different things about Bitcoin.
They have got my money in their banking system. I should be able to access it, right?
Our Player is live.
There's a good number of fucking, like, pretty smart beat catchers.
Hello and welcome back to the Bitcoin Cash podcast. Following Bitcoin Cash on its rise to global reserve currency, this is episode number 161. Functions, Quantumroot, and Starks, featuring the one and only Jason Dreyzehner. Today is Friday, the 19th of September, 2025. Today on the price, BCH, $604.92 per BCH. We actually pumped up to nearly 650. I don't know if we hit 650, but we're back down a little bit, but looking good there. One BTC sat buys 191.9 BCH sats, which is flat. One ETH, 742 megasats flat. Selene 30-day users at 563, and the Tokenaut TVL 12,330 BCH. Quick reminder, if you're feeling confused or not following what's going on in this episode, relax. That's a good thing. That's the feeling of learning. I was watching some videos yesterday about quantum computing, and I was having to remind myself a little bit of that. I know we try and make this show educational, but sometimes some episodes need a bit of a special warning that you just kind of got to push through and trust in your subconscious to pick up what's going on a little bit. Okay, our guest today is Jason Dreyzehner from LibAuth, ChainGraph, BitAuth IDE, Cash Tokens, VM Limits, and Big Ints, and all of the 2026 proposed chips. Jason, it's been a little while. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Powering through on the chips. Has that been consuming most of your time recently?
Yes.
Or?
Yeah, right up until till this week or so. But things have gone really well. Statements now coming in, lock-in statements, and I've reached out to a lot of stakeholders already, again for kind of final reviews and final statements. And then over the next couple weeks, I will be contacting everybody in the much wider Bitcoin Cash ecosystem also for statements as well.
Yeah, I feel like we're actually a little bit ahead of schedule, it feels like to me, because I was noting that my endorsement that I wrote up, right, was in probably the first or maybe the second week, I think the first week of September. And the previous year, it had been like the end of October. So I feel like we've gained about 5 to 6 weeks there in our timeline, just using myself as a metric. Yeah. It never feels that way. It always feels like, oh my God, everything's going on at once. But yes, that's right. We are objectively.
For sure. We're way ahead of where we were from a technical perspective too. We were like 6 months ahead this year. Like there's been one small change since May, basically. Whereas, last year, big components were still landing. And each year before then as well. So yeah, we're doing great. We're way ahead of any previous chip cycle.
Yeah, so let me speculate or get your thoughts on that as well too. I've said before on this show, I think there might come a point as we're doing well, the timeline is constantly pushing out. There might even come a point where it's worth having like a soft lock-in for 2 years ahead of time and having the pipeline even more kind of extended than it is right now. Like in the ETH community, they tend to do, I think, about 3 6-month upgrades ahead of time. They already have it all planned out, and we have like a one year upgrade. So I wouldn't be surprised if we could get to 2 1-year upgrades ahead of schedule as the community maturity, and also as the size grows. You kind of need to slow things down a little bit so more and more people have a chance to review it and be involved. What do you make of that?
Yeah, for sure. I can see that. We're, the past 5 years or so, there's been a lot of catch up sort of with kind of the lost decade in Bitcoin. But overall, the VM is in a really good spot. We can talk about some of the other kind of future things. But between VM limits kind of knocking out the biggest blocker for a lot of important developments, and then this year being kind of all the things that were blocked by VM limits that were right near the finish line, except for the final 20%, which was 80% of the work, was VM limits. It's definitely in a great spot, and I can certainly see also just that with the VM being good enough, there's a reduced demand for upgrades at all. and we can talk about today that one of the things I'm most excited about with the Quantumroot stuff is it's a good kind of technical tour de force of how useful the contract system is for avoiding the need for upgrades. Like we can get quantum ready vaults this year more efficiently than any cryptocurrency has them, and it doesn't require a quantum upgrade. No quantum specific opcode. So, there are a lot of things that have been taken for granted that like we'll always need an upgrade to do this. That I think miss, not just that Bitcoin Cash has come a long way, but that also Satoshi made very careful decisions in the early days, and Bitcoin script is a very, very good choice, probably better than any other cryptocurrency has yet chosen, hilariously.
That's crazy, but it just goes to show
yes,
genius.
We can
Genius
talk more
is
about
what it
that
is.
later, but it's
Yes.
comically better than a lot of things that various cryptocurrencies throw away Bitcoin script and then replace it with something significantly suboptimal.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. Do you have any thoughts then on the sort of the future? The two things that I know most sort of in the discussion are the 1 minute blocks, of which there's actually already a chip, UTXO commitments, which there's no chip, but there's certainly research and a lot of latent demand. I would say people are very interested in that because I feel like that's maybe the missing component in terms of scalability. Like people in the back of their mind are kind of like, okay, we've got ABLA. If BCH demand just comes in a tsunami, things will be fine. But still, that initial node spin up time is always something that it's easy to kind of wave off with like, yeah, we will fix this, but we actually do have to fix it at some point, right?
Yeah, those are both, and this will be, some of the slides you sent me a few minutes ago that this will be an opportune time to talk about some recent developments actually in the UTXO commitment world. But yeah, I'm definitely interested in seeing faster block times. That's definitely a user experience item that can be meaningfully improved at very low risk. And I'm also interested in zero conf incentive based strategies. Also, obviously the zero confirmation escrows and things like that, where you can also accelerate and have kind of bounty based incentive strategies for making zero conf activity final or incentive final. But there's also no substitute for faster blocks in some cases. So, both is also a reasonable answer. Yeah, so I'm excited to see that happening, and not directly involved myself, but it'll have a thumbs up from me over time for sure. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the Starks stuff that you mentioned, zero knowledge proofs. But I think the Bitcoin Cash space also maybe would benefit. A lot of Bitcoin Cash developers would benefit from kind of getting a new understanding of where the computer science has moved in the past decade or so with generalized zero knowledge proofs of a variety of constructions. But it may be news to a lot of people that it's possible to create a document that is itself trustless, that is maybe about a megabyte in size, that proves that a particular hash is the valid hash of a valid chain without having downloaded the UTXO set or validated anything. So yes, there's things like that. I see the eyebrows raising.
Jet's expression. I don't know if he's on camera, but he's got that look of like, oofed.
So when I chat kind of privately with stakeholders about other things, and they're like, hey, tell me about this. Like, I think a lot of people have not looked up in a little while at where the zero knowledge proof world has gone, but it's notable there are a lot of other cryptocurrencies that seemed kind of architecturally stuck in a box that have gotten their get out of jail free card by being able to hot swap their base consensus to just use zero knowledge proofs. And there's like a dozen of them that are planning to do it. not the least of which is Ethereum.
Yes.
So yes, the space has moved. The world has moved on specifically on zero knowledge proof and proving strategies and constructions. Now Bitcoin Cash is incredibly well positioned because we don't need that stuff to be the world's reserve currency. We can use it at our contract level, which means that not only do we not have to bet the farm on any particular construction, which at any point in the past year would have ruined the farm. There are a number of cryptocurrencies that have had to reissue supply in the past few months because of zero knowledge proof soundness issues. But there are a number of reasons why it's really, really nice to have a fast and really efficient layer one that is incredibly simple. And our layer one is incredibly simple, classically verifiable, and you can write your own node in a reasonable amount of time. Whereas for a lot of kind of, if you hot swap your consensus system to rely on zero knowledge proofs, there's, of course there's cryptographic soundness concerns, and there's new cryptographic assumptions, and then there's also if you're not using proof of work, we'll get into it later, but there's a lot of things that I have only in the past couple of years really re-examined some of my old assumptions. And a really good example I'll jump right to is in general, secret ballot voting, the concept of secret ballot voting. Anywhere you see it in the cryptocurrency world, and this is really relevant in proof of stake systems, this is relevant to the original Bitcoin hive mind, Truthcoin design, how the truth is decided in those designs, where you have a system where you assume that everyone can come to an agreement on the truth, because the truth is kind of like the Nash equilibrium, and it's hard to coordinate on an untruth. Well, generalized zero knowledge proofs may make it quite a bit easier to coordinate on an untruth. And where once we thought that if you submitted an invalid secret ballot and we could slash your stake for that, for example, it's rapidly becoming not just computationally, but also application level feasible to develop malicious coordination applications that specifically break things that we assumed were pretty secure because they used these sorts of slashing mechanisms. So anyhow, Bitcoin Cash is in a really good spot because we use proof of work, and the base layer is incredibly simple, and we can deploy a lot of this cool stuff as a contract covenant, but also it's not anyone's problem but the people who use the covenant if something goes wrong. Everything at the base layer is fundamentally transparent and therefore auditable. So as sound money, Bitcoin Cash is incredibly good, and cash tokens are incredibly useful. And then from there, you can very reasonably build privacy covenants. And essentially, if there are cryptocurrencies that are hot swapping their layer one consensus with zero knowledge proof based consensus, by definition, those proofs can be validated on Bitcoin Cash. If they're fast enough to be validated on a home node, there's a good chance they can be validated on Bitcoin Cash, and especially if you're dealing with like recursive ones, and we'll talk about the Stark stuff. But I think there's actually a class of zero knowledge proofs that's particularly well suited to Bitcoin Cash, and that's what I have talked about in the past couple of days, and why it showed up in the slides in the past 24 hours.
Yes. Okay. All right. Well, I got to give at least some credit to ETH. I, like you, even though I don't know nearly as much about it, I'm very skeptical of ETH's big plans to do a big swap out, because that's an existential thing at an enormous complexity, very high investment in a fast moving field. There's just like so many bad things colliding there that can go wrong. So it seems very risky. But regardless, they have a history with the merge and so forth of making these very
Yeah.
big bets that they think are great, but they end up
Yeah.
spending years on, for potentially not that much benefit.
Yep.
I should actually check on if ETH is
There's-
net inflationary again. I think it is. Like all their economic
Yeah.
modeling and stuff didn't protect them from any of that. But regardless, they funded a lot of this is ZK research, so we do
There's
have
a lot of brilliant
them
people and people working hard on this. Yeah, so I certainly think it can be done. With a lot of these cryptocurrencies, by and large, most of them can do anything. Computers are programmable. There's not. I think people like to imagine that there are greater moats between cryptocurrencies than there really are, and especially with the ones that don't have blinders on, and especially the ones that are essentially centralized and can do whatever they want, right? If you don't have to convince a very large, diverse, decentralized community to do something over a multi-year period, you can ship something in a couple of weeks, and you can actually break it terribly and roll out a fix.
I mean, that has its own cost. The point is that the cost
Yeah.
is not on the technology side, it's on the credibility and liquidity side as a result of that, right?
Like Solana had a private token system that had a soundness issue like a few months ago, for example, and it almost made it to mainnet or something like that. But yeah, so if you can move fast, then you can also get past things that might in other communities when considered to be an architectural limit. In practice, the architectural limits are kind of just people limits usually. They're brain worms.
Yeah, it makes sense. They say that at the highest level of play, the game is always decided just at the edge of where the boundary is, where the foul line is, because if you can kind of sneak over the edge, like what's his name? Kobe Bryant, I think, once famously said that he went back and studied the NBA rulebook to find which parts of the court the refs were standing at and what they were supposed to be like looking at any given moment, so that he could foul more than he should have been able to, because he knew that the ref handbook was that they would like look the other way at a certain moment. Anyway, that's kind of the crypto equivalent. I feel like it's Solana, just like whatever. Let's just go with this.
Yeah.
All right.
Anyways, just to stress, Bitcoin Cash is in an incredibly good position right now. VM limits and VM upgrades getting us to where at a base layer, it is very, very reasonable for Bitcoin Cash to deploy a lot of stuff that other cryptocurrencies are deploying as big network upgrades that are kind of coordinated and run over the course of a year. It's very possible for some of that stuff to be built by a single developer and shipped permissionlessly as a contract and iterated on. And if it's good, then people will use it, right? So, and we'll talk about the Quantumroot example, but I selected that example a little bit to be a technical demonstration of a computationally heavy contract that is non-trivial and has immediate applicability that is actually not possible to do on, for example, Solana. So Solana has a quantum vault that does not meet the 128-bit post-quantum security strength that Quantumroot does. And there are a couple different reasons. There's a computation limit, and then there's also simple transaction size limits that prevent Solana from deploying something like Quantumroot. So it was chosen specifically to highlight the places where we're doing extremely well and outcompeting other major coins on this topic.
Yeah, certainly sounds like an exponential advantage if we can have single devs just iterating over stuff at the speed that they can versus doing year-long network upgrades. That sounds like a massive edge. So tell me about functions then. This has been the most controversial of the chips proposed for the Layla upgrade. There was an op eval thing, and I saw actually, I think it might have been Jonas said something like he thought academically the op eval was actually better, but he was okay that things had in practice sort of worked out on this take one. There was also take two, take three. There was quite a bit of convincing different people over something that technically doesn't unlock anything new, but creates, one or possibly two orders of magnitude efficiency gains. In any case, that seems to have mostly been by the by, because GP have endorsed it, Bitcoin Cash Orders, the podcast has, Phoenix Callisti, Matthew, Jim Hamill, a bunch of other people as well too. Certainly seems like the weight of the community is behind it. So talk to me about the importance of this chip for people who haven't been following things so closely, sort of why it was controversial and how it's all worked out from your point of view.
Yeah. So at a super high level, functions are really useful in programming languages, especially for when you start to do non-trivial stuff, when you start to implement, complex things like post-quantum signing algorithms and ZK Stark verification on chain. There are lots of places where you need to be able to define a subroutine. The language that Bitcoin Cash's contract system is based on, Forth, the language that Satoshi chose, is a fantastic choice for contract systems, remains a fantastic choice for contract systems. If you're dealing in the classical model, right? If we don't want to bring in new zero knowledge cryptographic assumptions and kind of bet the network on a soundness thing. If you're building, at the classical lowest possible layer and the simplest possible system, it remains probably the very best of the best. But the functions chip is two opcodes, one define and one invoke. It's for defining and invoking subroutines, and that's it. It's for defining and invoking functions. In Forth parlance, they are called words. In the Forth world, you define a word, and a word can be data or code. Can be and specifically the functions chip is Forth word definition with shadowing disabled. Let's say so immutable functions and immutable constant definitions. So there's some discussion in the chip about that immutable versus mutable. And then also there was an entirely separate discussion about whether or not code could be mutated before it was given to the opdefine operation. And so there's a very long Bitcoin Cash research topic on that subset of the discussion, and it's also referenced at length in the chip now. But yes, we did it. There was a lot of research this year on a lot of possible directions. But at a very high level, the functions chip implements Forth's function behavior. And so, as you're saying, with the op eval being academically cleaner, if you're relatively comfortable with the language and you're comfortable with using the stack-based approach to break down your problem and kind of do your computation with minimal glue code, it's a whole direction of programming languages, stack-based languages, and concatenative programming. But if you have a really good kind of mental model of concatenative programming and you're very comfortable in the language, then op eval is a very, very natural choice for this. And that is also why it comes across as simpler and it fits very naturally. That is likely why it was a leading choice in 2012. And probably a lot of the contention in this cycle is because outside of kind of the stack-based concatenative language Forth bubble, the word eval just is going to scare a lot of people. If you come from the JavaScript space, the word eval is considered like an ultimate taboo. You should almost never use it in a JavaScript application. You probably should never use it in a JavaScript application, though it's really useful if you're doing a very simple demo of a very simple kind of in-browser calculator, for example. But if you come from that world, if you come from the JavaScript world, and you know that obby value you should almost never use, why would we add that as an opcode? And you get a sense for much of the initial concern this year, but then also probably much of the initial concern back in 2012 also. So when I was deciding exactly what to propose for 2026 back last November, when VM limits was out of the way, and it was clear that some of this stuff would be possible, and that moving quickly would obviously be help with our competitiveness against a lot of other cryptocurrencies that have already strong contract systems. My goal this year was to get Bitcoin Cash's contract system to a place where it was a clear second to none on contract development, where even if we don't add pre-compiles for specific zero-knowledge proof systems, which is what Ethereum is doing and Solana is doing, that at just a fundamental contract level, Bitcoin Cash contracts are as efficient or better than any other decentralized cryptocurrency. And we're close there this year, with the exception of a few code factoring things, literally loops and functions. They're not even fundamental behavioral differences. We can prove that they do not introduce something that you can already do today. Like anything you can do with loops and functions, I can prove you can already do today. So in general, they are just making the transaction sizes much smaller. Functions itself, it would be hard to say functions itself unlocks 10 to 100x efficiency improvements. It's probably closer down to the 10x for most kinds of applications, but certainly between functions and loops, 10 to 100x, and widely across a lot of use cases. And bitwise operations, like bitwise operations also, if you're doing something that does a lot of bitwise work, you can easily, just with bitwise and functions, you can easily save 50%, 50x, not 50%, 50x, whatever that is, where copying and pasting all of the emulation code essentially many times inside the contract would have ballooned the transaction sizes. Now in Bitcoin Cash, that still isn't too huge of a deal. There are a lot of use cases that you can do with a 100 kilobyte transaction. But surely if we can represent an algorithm in 100 bytes, we should do it rather than representing it in 100 kilobytes, right? So it's silly to have the contract form factor be wasting so much bandwidth and storage space. So that was a lot of the initial intention of starting, loops and functions, and then later in May of this year, after chatting with many of the stakeholders on functions, realizing there's a lot of just latent demand for bitwise, but needed significant technical effort to make happen. And Callan really buckled down. Callan with BCHN really buckled down and implemented a first draft, days after we first started chatting about it, and that came together very quickly. But yes, overall, if I were to summarize all of the 4 chips this year, in a funny way, they don't technically enable anything new, and we've talked about this before, where qualitatively they don't change how the virtual machine works. From like a kind of a black box outside perspective, but they allow you to refactor your code to be so much more efficient that in practice they do qualitatively make a lot of use cases really reasonable. And the Quantumroot one is a really good example too, because internally it has 66 lanes of 15 iterations, where if you copy paste that out, you're going to end up with well more than 100x increase in transaction sizes. But if we don't do that silliness, we can demonstrate that actually Bitcoin Cash with these opcodes and today's limits is already well capable and has been literally since 2010 has been offering more compute to contracts than you need for Quantumroot. And it is, I find it funny that Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin since 2010, Bitcoin Cash since 2010 has been offering for ECDSA signature validation, in the worst case, significantly more compute than is needed to do this Quantumroot thing, and implementing the same thing on, for example, Solana is prevented by Solana's compute limits. So there's something kind of hilarious internally about the fact that it's like since 2010, Bitcoin has had much higher limits on compute usage, but there's like some big disconnect between then and of course there's the lost decade in Bitcoin and then the evolution of many other cryptocurrencies that did not take the UTXO model, and they went with more with models that require in-series validation in a lot more cases, where you can't eagerly evaluate in the same way that we can, and then pushed that really hard and had very fast confirmation times, such that micro performance details become meaningful limits on real use cases. So the case we'll talk about soon. I thought this was a really good example of specifically where the UTXO model and Bitcoin, since 2010, Bitcoin's VM limits are well tuned to support exactly a use case that is widely considered to be the safest way to do post-quantum security. And we can essentially hide it away in sort of a black box that stays off chain unless it's actually needed. And so this is the Quantumroot stuff is the full implementation of what a strong kind of cold storage or business use case savings vault looks like, where you're dollar cost averaging in over many years, and now you want to sweep you bought $10 a week for a number of years. Now you want to sweep all those UTXOs with a post-quantum signature. On some chains out there, that would consume all of your money because you have a new UTXO for each of those. And there are other chains that argue that because they have accounts that they're saving that, but in practice, that means they're giving up some privacy details way in advance. And Quantumroot demonstrates that we can get the UTXO level privacy at the account level efficiency. And in fact, the UTXO model allows us to do the necessary performance for the post-quantum signatures that many of the account-based systems cannot do right now, and certainly would be a lot more expensive if they can do them. It's expensive in terms of gas fees. So yeah, I don't know where we are here, but so functions. I'll get back to. Very high level. Op eval would initially seem to be the kind of the cleanest thing to do if you come from a very Bitcoin Cash VM centric view of the world. And the functions chip is very, very similar. It is breaking what the op eval chip did, is breaking it into two operations, which just so happens to mean that it's exactly what fourth word definition, how fourth word definition works, and how function definition works in any language, right? So there's, if anyone's curious about some of the theoretical background for why we should do it the way Forth does it, go check out the Bitcoin Cash forums. I'll say even comparing to, there are still use cases where op eval would save one or 2 bytes in very specific cases. However, it's not actually preventing any of those use cases, right? You just use these function definition words slightly differently. It's perfectly possible that in the future someone will chip an op eval later if it turns out that so many contracts use that it's worth doing that. Probably for 1 to 2 byte savings. There are a lot of other places those savings could happen. P2PKH wastes 4 bytes, right? The way all single signature outputs waste 4 bytes versus if you define them as 1 byte, 3 bytes if you defined it as like an opcode, right? So yeah, in general, places where you can save a fixed number of bytes, and especially if the number of bytes is less than 10, those are probably not worth upgrades. But here, this gets us to a place where not only can you do some of the things that are very, very fourthy, very elegant, academically elegant, I think is the quote that you're thinking about. And there's some discussion about it where I've gone back and forth with Jonas and Alba DSL, the Haskell implementation. We've talked at length about Lambda definitions and references and such. But this gets us to a place where 99% of even the more advanced cases are perfectly served, and the places where more strictly functional programming or concatenative programming based approaches that are less useful for the wide majority of use cases, even those cases are very well served. So yeah, I'm very, very happy with where the discussion went this year, and it's great that we have so much material on the background for the functions chip. That'll be good training material for large language models, and will end up becoming really good, just historical information for why Bitcoin Cash did what it did. There are a lot of places where I wish I could go back and figure out, where it took a lot of sleuthing for me to figure out why Bitcoin worked the way it did in certain places. And part of the lost decade probably is that, the Chesterton's fence. There are a lot of fences in Bitcoin that are really hard to identify exactly what was reasonable and what was not. Obviously, we'll talk about loops, but it has no loops defined a whole generation of Bitcoin developers, even though it was like a left-in code comment after Satoshi abandoned that system of limits. So it made it into the Bitcoin wiki like 2 years after Satoshi abandoned it, and it still defined the zeitgeist for the following decade, right? And still in the wider BTC world, but. Yeah.
All right. So yeah. That's it. That's all good stuff. So I think the summary, how I'm sort of starting to formulate it in my head, because I'm going to need to make some explanatory videos, some quick summaries that we can put out and get this all out to the rest of the world, is, to me, it's kind of like in 2023 with cash tokens, that change was about power. In 2025 with Velma, the VM limits, that was about safety. And with 2026 functions loops, it's about efficiency. And that's kind of like, the 3-starter Pokemon or something. It's just kind of like, you've got everything covered. Boom. That's it. Those are the 3 components you need. And like you said, because I think if you don't understand the details of all this, you can kind of feel like, when is this going to end? Is that, the next upgrade, the next upgrade is always promised as like the greatest thing. But I think it now sort of seems to really be at a point that that's not going to be, like you said, protocol upgrades so much of a focus. Tell me a little bit, maybe briefly, you already mentioned a bit about them, the loops bitwise, maybe on the pay to script, the standardizing relay policy with consensus, maybe something about that. And also I'm curious about, you've posted on TempNet. So we now have TempNet, the September TempNet, and then we have ChipNet in November, I assume, and then testnet, but then also mainnet. We've got a lot of nets going on. We got a lot of nets. What's that about? Can you maybe break that down a little bit?
Yeah. Last in, first out. So TempNet is a fork of ChipNet, and specifically, I hacked together a a patch for BCHN to make it really easy to fork away from ChipNet early. So ChipNet is scheduled every year to upgrade on November 15th, and TEPNet is right now a little patch that is in my own GitHub repo, not a BCHN project. There might be some useful elements there. I tried to add some utilities that'll be a little bit more useful for monitoring upgrades, things that have been annoying for the past few years. But in general, it's just a patch that upgrades ChipNet 2 months early, and it's also specifically integrated. It also specifically integrates an activation covenant that I already designed and mined on ChipNet. So come November 15th, if all the implementations upgrade, then it will be very easy for anyone to broadcast a deterministic transaction from that covenant, and the transactions on Bitcoin Cash Research, and it's baked into the TempNet branch. It automatically got broadcasted by TempNet nodes to fork early, right? But on November 15th, if any implementations that are upgraded will accept the transaction spending that covenant, there's only one kind of transaction that can spend it, and it doesn't have any signatures. It's essentially a script puzzle that uses all the new upgrades. So it's just an activation transaction that we have well in advance of the activation. And the same thing can be used on mainnet too. But typically mainnet upgrades, there are plenty of people sending transactions with the new upgrades already, right? So here it's nice to have something well in advance, so that in this case, to any TempNet nodes that activate the new rules as of September 15th to test will accept the block that has the activation covenant, and they actually enforce that is the block for the upgrade, so that there was no issue with nodes not being able to follow the split. So if you use the TempNet setting, then your node will connect correctly to the TempNet nodes and actually be on a full test network. But then the other elements there, so TempNet also is the patch just makes it super easy to fork from ChipNet in advance. You can just set a new date and start again from where we are in ChipNet at any moment, and get some other nodes to connect to it. The one that's on Bitcoin Cash Research, the configuration on Bitcoin Cash Research has a number of nodes that are already connected. So if you want to test the upgrade, I encourage you to connect to our TempNet. But then also on November 15th, shortly after the upgrade, TempNet nodes will shut themselves down and connect to ChipNet. So connect to the actual real upgraded ChipNet. So yes, just getting kind of our ducks in a row. There again, being so far ahead of most years, it's nice to be able to work on stuff like making sure the block explorers are pretty on upgrade day for ChipNet. So I've got a pull request out shortly to BCH RPC Explorer, which is the screenshot there, and you can see it uses the new opcodes in the script breakdown there, and there's a few other things that need to be corrected, but there's not too much. It's just opcodes, and just opcodes this year. Going back to, I did want to say, when we talked about the upgrades for various years, I was trying to kind of put in context just yesterday or the day before upgrades by year. In a funny way, this is among the smallest virtual machine upgrades we've done, really ever. If I were going to rank them as far as impact, the 2018 upgrade is the one that kind of where the cat came out of the bag, if you will, on a number of issues, kind of performance, static analysis, things where if you thought that having the language be limited because no loops or because you can pre-validate contracts in a certain way. Those arguments were pretty insufficient back in 2013, but the 2018 upgrade really blew them out of the water, because once you have split and cat and you've got hashing operations, now you can branch based on the result of a hash. Now there's nothing you can do that that is a theoretical limit on the behavior of the language, if that was useful. And you can look at the Bitcoin Cash research discussion forums a little bit more on it. But also, I think a lot of those discussions back in 2011, 2012, I think a lot of them were sort of red herrings and at best illogical, if not actively sabotaging. But there are a number of things that the 2018 upgrade handled nicely for us, and I wasn't involved at all. But it's actually hard to imagine being comfortable with it. Actually, if I had put my, I would have felt a lot more concerned about putting my approval on the 2018 upgrade than on practically any of the others that we've had since in the virtual machine. The 2022 upgrade, also huge, was the introspection and mole. However, the things that it allowed you to do were already demonstrably possible after 2018. So it was a logical continuation of the path from 2018. 2023 was cash tokens. That was very big in that it allowed continuation within a single atomic transaction. However, I think that it's actually possible to prove that the 2022 upgrade also allowed that. I'll let some interested historian try to decipher that. The stuff that Quantumroot does with just introspection-based opcodes makes me think that a rule 110 or whatever proof of Turing completeness in a single transaction is probably possible with just the 2022 VM. But anyhow, doesn't matter now. For sure, it was possible by 2023. 2025 it certainly feels to be the biggest upgrade that I was ever involved in, because it was a very, something that was very, white knuckle, a meaningful safety thing. You could not afford to be wrong at all. And the 2025 upgrade, of course, had lots of kind of fail safes and kind of belt and suspenders approaches where, yes, we had the limits here, but there were also limits that, a good example actually that I think is probably still not well understood is that, for example, the napkin math on memory usage. You would maybe assume that because you can have 10 kilobyte stack items and you can have 1,000 of them, that you can have 1,000 times 10 kilobytes in memory usage. That's not actually possible. You can only get to about 80%. So that limit literally is not possible to hit at the memory usage maximum. Instead, it only happens internally in like memory bandwidth usage, sort of. But there are a lot of things like that, and then beyond that, there's the 10 to 100x margin of safety that we were able to demonstrate last year. So, anyways, this year feels very, very tame compared to a number of past years. In a funny way, it enables a lot of huge new features. Like, obviously, from a contract developer standpoint, loops are really, really useful, and functions are really, really useful. But from a safety perspective, and like, as far as me losing sleep, this certainly feels like the most cakewalk kind of upgrade that we've had in quite some time.
Script. Hit me quickly on that. Especially, right now we're seeing the drama in BTC, right, around changing the filters and what is, relay policy versus consensus. And I sort of have this vague idea that we kind of want to shrink that gap. Maybe not in all cases, but in some cases, there's a lot more research and so forth that needs to go into that. But that's kind of ironic that this kind of thing is coming at the same time, right? Once again, we can maybe just close the loophole before it becomes a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I like the direction of closing that gap. That's something. Well, I mean, I need to probably write a little bit more about some of the remaining little holes. By and large, though, P2S closes, the big one. Standard and non-standard scripts. Since 2012, it's not been possible to write raw scripts. You had to stick them inside pay to script hash. That adds a bunch of extra complexity at the application side and eliminates some possible efficiencies. It just prevents contract authors from being able to choose how they want it to work, basically. But yeah, so P2S gets us a long way there. Also, the unlocking bytecode standardness stuff is strictly a vestigial limit. It wasn't even terribly useful before last year, but most certainly is useless now. Yeah, so there's a few things cleaned up like that are each of the things that are related to silly hashing inside of a transaction. There are 3 different limits that are related to silly hashing, and those are all the P2S chip. And the P2S chip, began with the name like reduced transaction hashing or something like that. But it became very obvious that the obvious feature is that we'll have pay to script. So that's why it has the name pay to script, despite being the kind of three related rules around the hashing thing. But yes, standardized policy. There are only a few places where, one. So I've talked a little bit about that. 10 kilobyte script limit doesn't matter really at all from the perspective of the virtual machine. So there's some cans of worms to be discussed there. I don't plan on chipping it, but I've now published enough on the technical details that it's just a matter of like. I'm actually very hopeful that the conversation in the BTC camp will just clean out that the brainworms and bad ideas in this vertical. The op return limit, I'll note, the op return limit of 220 bytes is based on a miscalculation. It's literally the wrong. It's an incorrect number based on the original analysis for which it was chosen. The original analysis didn't realize that there's a more efficient way to do it than they were calculating. And so it's something like, 400 or 600. I don't know what it's supposed to be. But if we were theoretically trying to match the original rationale for the reason the 220 number was selected, then 220 is not the correct number. But yeah, there are all sorts of little things like that are, for example, the P2S chip doesn't touch any of that because I don't consider that to be really holding contract authors back. But 10 kilobytes to 100 kilobytes probably will be useful in short order. And in practice, 1 megabyte transactions are non-standard right now. And there are specifically a number of zero-knowledge Stark systems where 500 kilobytes or so for a proof that aggregates thousands of sub-private transactions would be really economical, would be actually more economical than Cache Fusion, but would require 500 kilobytes right in the proof. So I have not tried to advocate for any of that stuff. I've posted a little bit about it. There's lots of material now. You can ask a large language model what needs to be done. But I don't plan to chip any of that myself. But I hope that over the next year or 2 or 3, that we'll see lots of real on-chain experimentation with this stuff. And strictly speaking, it's perfectly possible today to break apart those large proofs into 10 kilobyte inputs and put them all in the same transaction and get them mined non-standard. So I expect we will see that, especially if Bitcoin Cash kind of rockets back in the top 10 and near top of the market cap. I would not be surprised if various zero knowledge proof teams start working on those kinds of things. And we're in a really, really good position for that to be a very constrained chip that gets well reviewed and happens, 2 years in advance, like you were saying, right? From an application standpoint, there's very little preventing a company from even beginning to build on what we have today. And it's only a little bit of waste. It's like 0.01% of the transactions total bytes wasted by breaking it apart into inputs. So it's truly just a development cost thing. And maybe some details about if we had read-only inputs getting to an actual zero overhead contract system for such zero knowledge proofs. But for sure, it's not holding us back like, no loops. So not even in the same category as lack of loops or lack of functions.
All right, nice. So tell me about Quantumroot. You've already mentioned it a little bit, but this is something you published in July. So, I mean, time flies. It feels like yesterday, really. But anyway, the idea was to have, like you said, a quantum secure vault, so using the scripting system and just relying on SHA-256, which is what the mining relies on. So if that's broken, we're screwed in a lot more ways than that. But without adding any new dependencies, to be able to make wallets that are essentially already protected from, if Google announced tomorrow that they've got a quantum computer and they're starting to swipe up everyone's coins, that BCH community could already be. I tend to think of it like an umbrella. I sort of feel like there's going to be, there's a storm coming and we can start putting up umbrellas and just slowly putting the coins under the umbrella so that it'll be fine when that happens. That's how I tend to think of it. But talk to me about Quantumroot in general.
Yeah. And this is actually a really good example of where the functionship gets you from something that is a qualitative difference to the difference between no functions and functions is that Quantumroot is about a third of the size. And importantly, getting all the way down to a third of the size means that past a certain number of inputs, I think it's 8 right now. I might be able to optimize it a little bit more. Past 8 inputs, it's actually more efficient than today's single signature vaults, single signature wallets. So if you are using a single signature wallet today and you printed a QR code and people are sending you money to that QR code, if you receive more than 8 payments, then Quantumroot is literally more efficient than what you're doing today in terms of on-chain bytes for the pre-quantum stuff. And that means it's actually really viable to roll out immediately. Because the post-quantum part actually doesn't add any, it adds 12 bytes, if you will, because it's the difference between considering a 20-byte hash secure and a 32-byte hash secure. So it is extremely, extremely competitive with our present contracts today, and importantly, in the large sweeping cases, where you're like a business receiving lots and lots of payments to a single address. In those cases, it is meaningfully more efficient today, meaningfully more efficient than today. It's about 15% better for very large sweeps, and meaning that, strictly speaking, the capacity of Bitcoin Cash for these pre-quantum Quantumroot transactions is as if our block size was between 32 megabytes as it is today and like 37 megabytes, even without a block size increase, right? So there's some discussion about that on the Bitcoin Cash research forum, but this was my attempt to demonstrate kind of the very best of what we can accomplish today with what we have already, what's already in our contract system, techniques we already can do, and cryptographic assumptions that we're already relying on, the security of the SHA-256 hashing function. So this vault specifically internally, the part that is not used on chain unless there is a quantum attack. The post-quantum part, costs no bytes unless you actually use those signatures. But even if you do use those signatures, we use some really clever aggregation strategies to get their per UTXO cost down to, in the common case, 1.3 kilobytes per UTXO, because the common case is 2 inputs, 2 outputs. Which is a lot better actually than, as far as I know, than anyone has demonstrated on any cryptocurrency for post-quantum efficiency. But in that business sweeping use case where business is accepting lots and lots of payments over possibly many years and depositing them to cold storage, for example, right? If you run the money through Cash Fusion so that your payee can't see what the contents of your vault look like, and they can't pinpoint you or something like that, but then you from there move it to a Quantumroot vault and you leave it there, and you don't need to sweep, because when you sweep it'll be much more efficient than if you were trying to aggregate over time. So some of these strategies actually improve pretty significantly over the current kind of standard of practice in the wider UTXO space and just the wider cryptocurrency space, where in the BTC world, BTC custodians are regularly sweeping and batching transactions and destroying their privacy and revealing their security setups, et cetera, et cetera. So this is trying to demonstrate kind of the very best of what we can show for a really strong post-quantum ready cold storage vault, kind of really tuned for dollar cost averaging and for business payments, for kind of high volume, high number of inputs and efficient sweeps of those inputs without sacrificing any privacy today. And that's, I think, a really notable difference between here and a lot of account-based models where fundamentally your account's public. So in order to get the post-quantum efficiency, you have to give up the privacy in advance in a lot of systems. So hopefully this is a bit of a tour de force of why the UTXO model is so awesome and why Bitcoin Cash's VM is awesome. Yes, I plan to get this to a production ready status, hopefully around May of 2026. There's a lot of work to be done, but as far as the contracts are concerned, the Quantumroot contracts are already fuzz tested in the repo. They pass all the RFC test vectors and the NIST approved test vectors. It uses a post-quantum a post-quantum signature system that has been industry standardized for 6 years now, and NIST standardized for most of that. So very safe standard assumptions. We're implementing it correctly. I'll continue to be auditing some of the Bitcoin Cash specific stuff, but from a contract perspective, it's actually well beyond a developer preview. It's complete. But I needed to go offline for a little while, so I just called it a developer preview and kicked it out the door. But wasn't quite sure yet. But I still have a little bit more to publish, maybe on kind of ramifications and things to talk about related to Quantumroot. But yes, I'm very excited about where the contract is now, and I plan to be implementing it directly into the open source tooling that the various things that I have. So libauth especially, I'm hoping to get really strong support in libauth over the next 6 months or so.
Yeah, so tell me about that, because when this was announced, I was talking on the show about this as being like a potential for maybe mid 2027 that like Selene uses libauth for its transaction signing, for instance. And you're talking about cold storage. So in my mind, I'm imagining a feature in Selene that you tap a button somewhere, enable a quantum cold storage vault, and then you can put your coins in there and feel like you're already protected, even just sort of as a proof of concept or even as a sort of a marketing play. Like that would just be amazing if the rest of the ecosystem is like, wow, BCH is already migrating into quantum security. But in my mind, the ideal thing we want to have is to just put it in Selene just in general, not for the cold storage, high volume of coins, or high price of coins type of thing, but even just day-to-day, everyday payments, because there is a sort of inevitability to the fact that all of the active coins are at some point moving around, right? So the more of the ecosystem we get migrated over, we'll end up with users that are protected by default without ever having to worry about it. But the earlier we can start that process, obviously, subject to the risks, then the better, because it will time will take care of a lot of it for us. So what's the possibility for having, general sending and receiving money in Selene quantum secured in 2026?
For sure. That's my goal. And having it be at the very least being the savings wallet construction in a lot of different Bitcoin Cash wallets. But yes, I think it's also a really good spending wallet construction. I think it's notably superior to P2PKH as a normal spending wallet if you are using Bitcoin Cash significantly day to day because of the sweeping behavior. If you are extremely careful about how you're using Bitcoin Cash and you only use one address per interaction, you're never reusing addresses, then potentially P2PKH today is a little bit more efficient than Quantumroot, but it's not much, even if it were a little bit more efficient. So that's where the difference between efficient and inefficient by 1 or 2x, it's not a use case difference, but it's such a meaningful difference because it brings the cost of switching to post-quantum secure vaults, it brings the cost to less than zero. It's actually an advantage to switch away from P2PKH for a significant number of use cases. So, and that's especially like the farmer's market use case where you print a QR code and people send you money that QR code. You for sure are going to do better with Quantumroot today with the Quantumroot pre-quantum stuff, just because of cash tokens and because of input aggregation, introspection-based input aggregation. So yeah, there's a bunch of cool stuff that Quantumroot also demos, things that we've been able to do for a little while, and I actually didn't realize how efficiently we could do some of them until in the past few months. So I wanted to get them all in there. So that's what the Quantumroot is all the things I wanted to get out.
Yes. So you mentioned the cash tokens and sort of the single address use case. I know people are also excited about RPA. Has been just like on the community's wish list that everyone's like, this would be so cool if we can get this all working and stuff. But of course, with our limited resources and dev talent and how much work goes into everything at all layers of the ecosystem, nobody's really found the time to make that a top priority then. But does this Quantumroot type of thing mesh well with, we're not going to have problems with people sending in and out cash tokens or with RPA? Does it conflict with anything like that, or is it all just going to fit together nicely?
Yeah, it should fit cleanly. Anything that supports Quantumroot very specifically wastes a few bytes in a few places in order to use P2SH 32 outputs, and that has privacy benefits because you can't actually, none of the contracts can be positively identified as Quantumroot contracts until they're revealed. No two outputs in the vault are associable. Even if you sweep, no one can see what your other vault UTXOs are until you sweep those, and only if you choose to sweep them in the way that reveals that they were associated. So it's also possible to sweep them without necessarily revealing wider associations. Pre-quantum, and then you can actually design the secondary fallback path to be a tree of tokens if you wanted to actually positively forever into the future prevent association of the UTXOs. And one of the cool features of Quantumroot is that you can upgrade it from the wallet side. If you're upgrading the cash token based spending path, you can actually upgrade every UTXO in your vault to use a different security strategy by moving a single UTXO, which is not associated with those UTXOs. So there are a number of different kind of combinations that various wallets could choose for how they want their user experience to work, where you could, for example, install the app and you get a single sig wallet. And then there might be from there a migration, a real migration of all of your UTXOs to a 2 of 2 wallet. But beyond that, if you wanted to add like a fallback to a security service, for example, in the case that you lose your keys or something, you could do that strictly at the wallet layer, only moving one UTXO and without revealing any privacy information about the contents of your vault. You wouldn't necessarily need to merge your UTXOs in order to make that upgrade. So there's a lot of stuff, a lot of cool things that we get out of having cash tokens and introspection that are they've been possible for several years now, obviously, but getting them into real products and first getting people building the products to realize that these are levers you can pull. You can design your system to be at the kind of this level of specificity. And I'm hoping to build some of that stuff into libauth and make it a little bit easier to, I'll probably try to build a little bit of a happy path for what great cold storage onboarding looks like. Multi-factor, multi-vendor, multi-sig is something that the wider cryptocurrency industry simply does not have, with rare exception, where even if you're using multi-sig, you're still vulnerable to a supply chain attack of a single vendor, the vendor of your wallet. So it would be great if Bitcoin Cash evolved to where you can have cold storage that's split between Selene and a couple other wallets, so that even if one of them is hacked, your canary money moves, you'll know that it was hacked, but your cold storage doesn't. And there's a lot of places like that where for years it's been possible, but requires the application level development to get that done. But yes, we have a number of cool places where we can do new things with introspection and with cash tokens. They give you a lot more capability at the wallet developer layer, where you can create an onboarding strategy that starts with lower security and gets upgraded smoothly without losing privacy, et cetera, et cetera. Did I cover the?
Yes. So I'm making some notes here because I'm just trying to fuse it all together in my head, that hopefully in maybe 1 to 2 years we're going to have the Selene wallet with Cash Fusion, Quantumroot, cash tokens, RPA secured by multi-sig, multi-vendor, with better efficiency and scalability than anything else that exists in cryptocurrency. And that's basically all sorted today. It's really just a matter of time and the implementation cost of doing
from an
it.
upgrades perspective, where the VM is done enough for all of that, for sure.
Yeah, man. Whew. That's that's where I feel like yeah. There's a lot to build, and we definitely need a lot more devs and a lot more money in the mix to speed this all up. But it's good to know that we're on a path where that's the kind of thing that is capable of going to global reserve currency. Like if we can just have that as an open source app that anybody can just download Selene, but with your Moria assets, USD, gold, BTC, ETH, the entire NASDAQ, all private and quantum secured with a single QR code scan. Like that's kind of what we're aiming for here. That's what this is all about. Yep. And we're on the pathway to get there. It'll come around faster than we think as well too. We'll be sitting here in the end of 2026 or 2027 saying like, woof, remember when we were in the primitive days of 2025? Yes. Yeah. Well. What about this idea that you kind of snuck this one into the blog post? I see you didn't make a big deal out of it, but I highlighted it a little bit, that the BTC Taproot addresses are actually extra quantum vulnerable, and they're going to need to unwind that or rework it, or people with their money in the Taproot are just going to lose it to quantum, or what's going on there?
I did want to mention it in the blog post because it's really easy to kind of market around it. and you'll hear lots of stuff about like we just need to upgrade Taproot to be quantum ready. But that requires everybody to actually move their money or an upgrade that confiscates somebody's money. So it's a tough spot to be in for sure. And if anybody's curious, I wrote at length about it in the blog post. There's a big section on comparing Quantumroot to Taproot and kind of what Taproot's options are. There are some kind of quite complicated zero knowledge proof strategies where you could paper around the issue with zero knowledge proofs. It would be a pretty funny solution to something that was just like they should have made a hash, but versus something that's insanely complicated at the protocol level. But it's kind of par for the course on BTC, so it's whatever.
Yes. Okay. Well, no need to go into that in detail, but I just thought it was a funny example of just the compounding problems that they have. In their ecosystem are just adding up in terms of how many upgrades. Like they're not out of the lost decade; they've had the lost decade. They're in the second lost decade is starting for them basically, and then you have the bugs that they've introduced. You've got the community infighting. You've got like slowly it's even dawning on them. Actually, it's taken a while, but even some of the smarter ones over there are starting to realize like we have a lot of problems, not just like one or two problems. Like we have like a lot of problems. So I just thought that was just adding something else to the pile.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, really. Yeah, I put it in there because I wanted to have the information out there, but it's hard to find in a clear enough explanation. But like the idea of you just have to disable the key path. That's either a confiscation or a 100% full migration of everybody in the UTXO set. You can paper over it with a kind of ZK proof or a commitment scheme where people demonstrate that they're using a BIP32 key and that they have knowledge of a hash that produces the result that you see on chain, but that confiscates money from anybody who didn't use BIP32. So there's it's just an awkward problem to have with a protocol that came out in 2021.
Yes. What about on the quantum stuff? There's also various research going on in terms of like on the BTC side, they have this idea of hourglass, which is allowing only one sort of quantum theft, let's say, per block, so that when the quantum computers become a reality, it's not like one guy just grabs 1.7 million inactive coins and then dumps them all on the market. And just that's a bigger problem for BTC than for us right now because we have a smaller market cap, and so they would get targeted first, and also secondly we would be less proportionally kind of damaged by it, I guess, or it would be equally proportional potentially, but it would be less of an issue basically. But there is some discussion to be had about that. There's also people who are advocating for even having a day where there's a burn day basically, where just everybody who has not migrated to quantum safety gets burnt. Obviously there will be people saying that that's violating property rights and so forth. But then there's also the element of not only the economic damage, but also, would that potentially put the project at risk? Would it be an issue with miners? Like there's a lot of things that go into that. Have you considered any of that, or do you have any timeline as well for the quantum stuff? Like I've seen 2030, maybe people are just gravitating to a round number there. That's kind of where we want to be ready.
I don't have any strong opinions on the topic right now. I've gone back and forth in the past, like that, absolutely not. We should never do that. But then, on review, like actually that's very reasonable to have a, especially if you have a on-chain bounty system that is, or some prize or something that's sufficient to demonstrate that as a concept, we are going to get quantum computers. So an example is SecP 32K1 is a bounty prize for breaking a much easier to break key, but in a way that would still prove that we're likely on a quantum trajectory, that there's not a fundamental problem in the idea of quantum computing, and that we are likely to see them eventually. So yeah, it's not something I'm thinking about much right now, because I think we've got another year at least, hopefully, and I got other things to worry about in the coming year. But for sure, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I might have joked that quantum computers are still 20 years away or something like that. I might have had the default dismissive attitude. There are a number of if anybody has those kind of pre-baked opinions that you've had for a decade now, it may be time to revisit them. There are a number of verticals along which it would appear that, for example, if quantum computing works at all, a big research result from Google in 2024, which really kicked off a lot of the, or was a big part of a lot of the kind of recent surge in interest. A result from Google in 2024 was that quantum error correction is like 100 times easier than we thought it was. Supposing you meet a certain threshold of it's possible at all, right? So there will be all sorts of people that will be yelling at their screens now, like, that's not possible at all already. But strictly speaking, the academic research and all these very isolated verticals would indicate that there is exponential progress being made, both on the getting qubits in existence, qubits, sorry, I can read it however I want, getting them in existence, logical qubits in existence, and getting them talking together, and then getting them error corrected. Each of these verticals appears to be making forward academic progress, and there are a lot of people spending their entire careers and large companies betting billions of dollars on the topic. So it's not something to ignore. Certainly, it's not something to ignore. It's not something that I have any particular knowledge on, other than I can look at prediction markets and expert opinions and stuff. But for sure, my over under on whether or not we get quantum computers before 2030, that's much, much higher than it was 5 years ago, for sure. And there are certainly voices out there saying that they expect to see quantum computers before 2030. I think there are a couple public companies that have all but promised to have a working quantum computer in 2029. So there are ways that we lost Jeremy. Anyways, there are ways in which these. There we go. You're back. Hey.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are probably places in which some of these companies would be committing actual securities fraud if they were making these claims, but then in private saying that it's actually just a load of not true, right? So there is a lot of skin in the game, more skin in the game than I'm willing to dismiss. So anyways, I don't have any specific knowledge on this topic. I'm definitely not an expert. From a perspective of what should be done in the Bitcoin Cash space, to me, it seems actually quite easy, because we can demonstrate that we can actually outperform single signature wallets today. Bitcoin Cash is sufficiently capable to do better than we've been doing for the past decade, for at least a meaningful set of important use cases, right? Sweeping. So actually, if you go back and think about some of the original reasons that why account-based models were promoted back in 2015, whatever, 2017, those are the very reasons that Quantumroot handles very nicely. We get the security benefits of the UTXO model. We get the performance and VM benefits. but we get the on-chain efficiency benefits of essentially account-based once you want it to be account-based. So I think that's all very cool and makes it a much easier choice, right? We don't have to bet on a quantum upgrade. We don't even have to make the upgrade about quantum at all. It just so happens that we get it for free if we have a sufficiently capable VM. So
yeah. No, I mean, I think there will be. I can just see it being another community thing that I think we'll be able to come to some kind of, agreement or strategy. It reminds me a lot of the block size limit and ABLA. There was the BTC split, then there was 8 megabytes, but then some people thought it should be more, it should be less. There was the BSV split, there was 32 megabytes. Then it took a little while for ABLA, and some people didn't like that. Some people wanted to do something else, blah, blah, blah. And then it eventually got there. And the same we're kind of seeing now in a way with 1 minute blocks. Bitcoin Cash Odyssey has a knack for picking those kind of issues. I think he maybe kind of secretly likes it, having something a bit controversial, but regardless, like the quantum strikes me as similar because I said, I think when we talked about it at Bliss, the closing panel of Bliss 2024, I briefly mentioned quantum, and I was talking about I'm open to the idea of at least thinking about burning the non-quantum protected coins past a certain date. I think it should be at least considered, or we should spec it out. Immediately people then got a little bit inflamed about it. It's a hard thing, once again, that people say you've got to separate the idea of discussing the idea versus having an opinion that this is what we should do and it needs to be resisted and like panic, But that kind of process takes a little while to work through. And in the meantime, like you say, the path is very clear that we can already start migrating to sort of quantum protection, and we can see how that goes. We can see maybe there's loads of market adoption of it that we don't expect. Maybe there isn't. But it does strike me that quantum is going to come sort of bam out of nowhere, like faster than everyone expects. If it's a problem, I understand some people saying, "Oh, it's not really a problem," etc. But it seems like there's not really a downside to being protected and prepared. Besides the dev resources spent on it, but if it's already beneficial and making an economic advantage anyway, like it's not a big cost, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I agree. There's very reasonable to consider. And with maybe the caveat that any such behavior can also be quite a bit less controversial if you have, for example, an enshrined
like a recovery mechanism or something,
an enshrined like notification strategy where if somebody gets a sufficiently capable quantum computer to break something that is well on the path to breaking a real key, all they need to do is publish that message on chain, and the upgrade is queued, and you have 1 month to move your money if you haven't moved it until now, right? And then that can go out in an upgrade, and that can sit for 5 years and not happen at all, or it could happen 6 months later, and we would just be glad it was possible, right? So for sure, I do hope that people will people who are more qualified to to work on it than I are certainly working on it in other cryptocurrencies, and other cryptocurrencies are getting reasonable solutions. Among them, some of those kind of quantum flag day strategies where it just takes one rogue quantum computer to leak that quantum is possible, right? And I am cautiously optimistic that there will be multiple first quantum computers that at least get past kind of the starting block where they get the qubits talking to each other. that's where we're at right now. If they can do that, then I think that will draw a lot of attention. And I think it would be difficult to hide that result for too long. It's also of course, very possible there's a quantum Manhattan project going on in multiple countries, and very possible they've already done that, and they are hiding it sufficiently, right? So, we should for sure encourage those paying attention to get ready. But I don't have any specific opinions on what to do. I do do think I think there's been a little bit of, maybe not intentional, but a little bit of water muddying in the BTC world about specifically how many BTC are vulnerable to being swept by quantum computers, because there's always the incentive to kind of pad that number by saying, oh, this stuff has been revealed on chain. But no exchange is going to keep reusing the same single sig key if it's even remotely plausible in their mind that it's going to get stolen, right? These exchanges switch cold storage wallets pretty regularly. They're not switching them because it's a lot safer to not touch your software until you're sure that touching your software is less risky than not touching your software, right? So these exchanges are not going to sit with millions of coins in vulnerable addresses the moment it becomes even viable enough for an upgrade to happen, right? So if we're talking about an upgrade to in a sense, like, punish the people who haven't moved, the fact that the upgrade would get to where it's actually being deployed implies that millions of coins will have already been moved out of that pod. So we're only talking probably about coins that are pre-2015.
But even then, it's still like there's at least 1.7 million. I know there's about 1 million of Satoshis. There's about 700K in pay to private key that aren't like hash protected or anything, that are kind of sitting there and almost certainly burnt/lost.
Well, that's that too. Like, I think people are being really generous with burnt/lost there, because, every few years we find that there's another one who's just stuck another 10K, right? I mean, it's not. I mean, some of it for sure is, but I think that the estimates are probably a lot higher than people. Everybody's got an incentive to pad that estimate, right? All the BTC people want to believe that all that money's been lost, right? They want their BTC to be more scarce than it actually is, and the quantum people want to increase the concern, right, to get action. And so I'm right. Certainly lots of that money could have been lost in boating accidents, but in practice, a lot of those boating accidents don't actually happen, right?
Yes.
I think that probably that problem, especially in BCH, is quite a bit less pronounced than it is, for example, in BTC, where Taproot is a problem. Though there's not tons and tons of funds on Taproot, it's a little bit more of a
it's also just their economic reality. They can't. They're not putting in these upgrades and stuff. They're not going to be like they're a shambles in terms of whether or not they're going to be ready, and then also their economic situation and having. Like the BCH community can come to an agreement and roll out an upgrade, whereas they're going to have people screaming about ossification and all kinds of stuff like that. We're just not going to be a problem for us. All right. Anyway, we've got to get onto these stars because we've only got like 20 minutes left. But hit me with some of this. So you were kind of talking the other day, a bit out of nowhere, I would say, but a wizard is never late, kind of vibe. Higher powered, VM on BCH is allowing this snarks and starks, which are these two different kinds of zero knowledge proof systems. I was reading up on this a little bit, but I've got to say I'm definitely not an expert in it. These two are separate to the idea of a roll-up, which is that you could have a layer 2, which was kind of batching transactions using zero knowledge. So besides attracting research talent, which is one amazing thing that we could do by exploring this area, what is kind of the point of these ZK Stark systems, and why are you getting interested in it?
So zero knowledge proofs let you prove a computation. Actually, to go way back to when we were talking about UTXO commitments earlier, something that Bitcoin Cash enthusiasts should know is a fact of the world, is that it is possible to have and I'm quoting from like a 1980s paper or something like that. This is me parsing something. It is possible to have a typical computer on your desktop verify trustlessly a document essentially produced by a giant cluster of many supercomputers, and have your standard at-home computer verify that they performed a computation correctly on data you have not seen, and are giving you a proof of a precise program having been executed on that data for an arbitrary amount of time, where I think that the quote is that a home computer can manage a farm of supercomputers trustlessly, without actually doing the computation itself. And that's like a hard thing to intuit, but it's based on cryptographic assumptions, and there's like it's turning the problem into a non-interactive cryptographic proof. And so SNARK is a succinct non-interactive argument of knowledge. And they call it an argument of knowledge because it's not technically a proof, at least in the mathematical sense. And there was there's a lot of back and forth about that back in the 80s or 90s, whenever it was. And so that kind of field developed into what we now call succinct non-interactive arguments of knowledge. That's a SNARK. And transparent is the T in STARK. So STARK is so SNARKs are, so actually both of these in a sense are kind of big catch-all terms. There are a lot of different teams with kind of radically different constructions that call their constructions SNARKs or STARKs, and they can be vastly different. Some of them are more different than they are similar. And I also don't want to pretend like I am an expert in this topic at all. I have narrowed in on kind of some subcategories of some constructions that I am excited about specifically for Bitcoin Cash, because they fit Bitcoin Cash very, very well. And that is ZK STARKs. But at a very high level, SNARKs are, in general, when you hear somebody talk about a SNARK, they're usually talking about elliptic curve pairing based SNARKs, which are the thing that Ethereum has had built into Ethereum's consensus for a number of years now. And I think they actually have rolled out now another precompile. So they've got two different ways of doing that, or it's coming soon. I'm not sure. Two different ways of doing SNARK verifications. If you've heard the term Groth 16 or BN 254 or BLS 12 381, and there's a number of, all of that stuff is in general in the SNARK category. And then there's all sorts of actually, I think there are, last I saw, somebody had a pretty good blog post on a taxonomy of the space, and there were like 8 different categories, and like 6 or so of them kind of categorize themselves as types of SNARKs, but they're all pretty radically different constructions. So getting beyond this level of detail requires talking about a specific one, but in very general high level for Bitcoin Cash developers and enthusiasts, SNARKs tend to fit account model based systems a little bit better. They are a little bit older and a little bit more developed. Their algorithms for verifying tend to, if you really dig into them, their algorithms for verifying them, many of them rely on a trusted setup. There are SNARKs that don't rely on trusted setups, so it's not, this is where the taxonomy is just all over the place. But many of them, including the ones, the one that Tornado.cash used, for example, the original one sort of on Ethereum that sort of kicked off the space, and that still almost everything in production ultimately uses that one. And even STARKs will actually wrap their STARK verification in a SNARK to deploy it on Ethereum, because Ethereum essentially subsidizes it with a precompile. So it's, anyhow, it's SNARKs are theoretically possible to do on Bitcoin Cash. They are probably, in general, really inefficient because the code to validate them probably is very heavy. A big part of the reason is because you have to have these giant root of unity tables that end up being tens or hundreds of kilobytes in some of the systems. And so fitting all that in a single transaction doesn't make a lot of sense. You need to have that as a built-in feature of the protocol, unless we start talking about, raising those limits to 1 megabyte for outputs and then also getting read-only inputs. Then suddenly we have it at the protocol level, an equivalent system. But I'm not going to chip that. It's technically possible. We could certainly get there. But at a super high level view, today, Bitcoin Cash is really, really well suited for Stark verification. And Starks, I think the taxonomy tree is actually a little bit thinner because it's all trees of hashes, sort of. You can think of it as being the hash-based thing, where snarks use elliptic curve pairing, lots of magical mathematical structures. Starks generally are really, really simple. They are they're Merkle trees of hashes and breaking out the computation and just sort of, you can imagine it being a spreadsheet and then proving certain boxes in the spreadsheet. Put that in a Merkle tree and that's a Stark. Bitcoin Cash is really well, Bitcoin Cash is really well suited for that because Starks generally have very large proofs compared to Snarks, because Snarks have reduced their proof sizes with these mathematical strategies that require at least a system-wide trusted setup. Many of them require both a system-wide trusted setup and a trusted setup every time you change your contract, every time you change how the system behaves. So if you upgrade your Bitcoin Cash covenant that uses a Snark, if you're using some of the earliest Snark libraries, then you need to upgrade your the code, the trusted setup for that code itself, as well as relying on another higher level trusted setup. And a trusted setup means that if anybody knows the secret numbers, they can just falsify anything in the proof system. So very bad. You don't want that to happen. And if you've heard about the different trusted setups that Zcash did, and Ethereum did a big trusted setup for its recent zero knowledge proof stuff, there are of course ways to do trusted setups very safely, and do them in a very decentralized way. And then if you participate yourself in a trusted setup, you're probably pretty confident that it worked because you actually did it correctly and you deleted the key, right? So if you participated in it, you're probably happy with it. But in general, the whole model of most of these kind of Snark systems, I would say is a little bit better suited for account model systems. And Bitcoin Cash can technically already do that. However, we are uniquely qualified for ZK Starks, which most of the account model systems cannot compete with Bitcoin Cash on the on-chain verification of Starks. Bitcoin Cash, where we excel right now is data availability is relatively cheap. You pay per byte essentially for that goes onto the chain. So we're sensitive about bandwidth and storage still. But from the perspective of many of these account model systems, they're paying actually just for compute. They're not paying for storage. Storage is actually a little bit subsidized on those systems because the compute is so expensive that it's the only thing anybody's caring about. So anyways, the Bitcoin Cash model is very well suited, I believe, for Stark verification on chain. Now, the tweet you have there is me now asking publicly. I've been watching for a while many of the Stark systems. I'm very excited about several of them. And it's been theoretically possible. And again, I'm not an expert here. I am a I am a developer wanting to use the tooling that's being produced by maybe a dozen or so different companies and teams that are hiring the cryptographers working on this stuff. And the Stark space and probably kind of the wider zero knowledge proof space has probably been a little bit hyper fixated on Ethereum scaling because Ethereum is the source of a lot of this. Like Ethereum's architectural decisions are the reason that so much money got invested in scaling via zero knowledge proofs. We don't actually need that for scaling. However, zero knowledge proofs are very cool for example, privacy covenants. So, Tornado.cash was an example of a zero knowledge proof that used the snarks back in 2021. It's certainly possible to do a lot of different private applications. So if we talk about the kinds of applications, on-chain applications that use private data, there's definitely, I am, again, no expert here, and it's probably more useful to go and look at what different companies are raising money and building projects to do on Ethereum, mostly Ethereum, where they're doing things like real world cash exchanges for cryptocurrency, where they use an on-chain zero knowledge proof to verify literally a withdrawal email from your banking institution, where they've pre-baked what they expect the withdrawal email to look like. And they check for the number to see if the number is correct. And what's funny is zero knowledge proofs make this use case theoretically possible. It's something we would not have thought was possible like 10 years ago, many of us at least, where my goodness, you actually can on-chain verify that this guy sent that guy money, because if not, then his bank would not have signed the email saying that he sent the money to the place that he was supposed to send it, right? And you can upload the proof to a public chain and still not reveal your private banking details, right? So that is a use case that I thought was very interesting, and I've seen recently. There's, I think, multiple companies pursuing it in the Ethereum space. In the Bitcoin Cash space, beyond privacy, and we've talked about this a little bit, but in the vein of getting ready to be number one, we need to talk about some security questions, because our societies probably are generally not ready for a world in which the primary currency is self-custodied in digital with, by and large, single signature keys on devices held by the people that own the money. Much of the history of money is money and assets is people putting assets in places where in practice, they're actually making a credible commitment to not giving the asset to an attacker in the case that they are attacked. So, and this is, like a little bit of a squeamish topic, but the, wrench attacks and the general, the market is the KR&E insurance market, kidnapping, ransom, and extortion insurance market. It's a little bit of a secretive market in the global space. It's quite the market among kind of, large Fortune 500 companies, if you will. Many Fortune 500 companies will have insurance over their C-suite because their C-suite is, directly tied to an asset that ultimately is fungible enough for an attacker to really use to exploit a physical attack. And obviously, cryptocurrency has, among the lost decade in cryptocurrency development, is that we really haven't moved the needle since 2013 on making cryptocurrency physically safer to hold. So anyways, something I'll throw out there is that I do think that there is a real possibility. You can do on-chain decentralized exchanges, of course, in a zero knowledge covenant system.
Sounds like you can do a TradFi decentralized exchange. That sounds like you can have.
That's right. Yes, and there are teams doing that stuff. So like go check out what other people are writing a lot more about these specific use cases. So I'm giving you a very high level, I'm a hobbyist enthusiast level of understanding on most of these use cases, but hopefully I've given you enough of a taste to go and now review it yourself. But there's of course decentralized exchanges happening in zero knowledge systems. Those have advantages because you can't, in our case, that is a good strategy probably to prevent miners from sniping backwards and exploiting miner extractable value in decentralized exchanges, right? Because they can't see the trades at all, and nobody can see the trades, right? That's a possible use case, and those are being built. I hope Bitcoin Cash can attract some of those projects actually over the next year or two, because there's some very cool stuff out there. But on the security topic, so far as I know, nobody's building this, but something I want to throw out is that I think there's a real place for zero knowledge proof based prediction markets actually that are specifically revealing to the chain the statistic. There is a 30% probability that today Bob is under duress, right? And if the chain can see that information, you can write a contract theoretically where a cash token commitment is excreted by the contract to show that that this condition has been passed or whatever. And maybe the contract needs to just check the covenant or something in some way. But fundamentally, you can have a setup where a vault can simply turn off if that likelihood goes too high, right? And so at a very high level, something that if anybody's really interested in this, go look at what Italy had to do in the 90s with its kidnapping problem, where you fundamentally have to, the problem is that right now, on this call, the three of us can commit to saying that we would never ever give the attacker money. And if that could be enforced, then there would be no attackers because there's no profit to be had, right? But in practice, when they actually get you, your incentives change. You no longer want to follow your pre-commitment, and you want to make the bad things stop.
Concessions, yeah.
And that arbitrage is the source of the KR&E market. And traditionally, this is directly the purpose of a state, of a government, and a lot of people believe is the valid role of government to stop this thing from happening, right? If you Bob marches into Charlie's house and takes it over, right now, if you do that in the United States, Bob has a approximate certainty that he won't get to keep it, especially if he takes it by violence, usually, right? Because the whole system of property rights and the basis on which real estate exists in that territory it sort of is predicated on the fact that if you have a claim to this property, that somebody who marches into it isn't going to end up with it. And the reason people don't march into property and try to take it in that territory, at least, is because they know that there are approximate number of days that they'll get to live in the house after they go to war to take it. The approximate number of days is zero, right? Yeah. So you want an asset that works like that if you want it to be a good savings asset. And so a fundamental feature of a good savings asset is that you can, that the asset itself offers the possibility of those kinds of pre-commitments in a obvious and public way. And it's definitely a dream that we could, a dream of mine that we could get Bitcoin Cash to a place where even before we get to number one, most Bitcoin Cash wallets are, quantum safe, of course, but also we've developed some solutions here where hopefully it should be by and large understood among criminal groups that, other than Bitcoin Cash people currently being poor, obviously,
Yeah.
that even when Bitcoin Cash people aren't poor in the hopefully not too distant future, you still can't expect to get anything out of them, because the way that fundamentally the wallets work actually put the money itself at odds with the owner of the money.
Yes.
In the duress situations. And if you can do that, you have removed the need for an external force on the physical security of the individual who owns the money, right? It's very directly offering a voluntary, meaningful alternative to what currently requires a state in a geographic area. And most of the developed world, you're not going to be kidnapped over your cryptocurrency right now, but there are definitely parts of the world where you will be. Getting Bitcoin Cash to a place where on a technological layer, we can use, for example, zero knowledge proofs, prediction markets, contract systems to allow the wider Bitcoin Cash space to commonly make that pre-commitment and have it actually be enforced, where, if Bob is actually kidnapped and in a foreign country or whatever, the attacker is never going to get the money. And if the attacker knows that in advance,
they're not going to do it. They're going to attack someone else.
Right.
That's it. And then BCH has a new selling point, like join
right?
BCH. Yeah.
Right. So, privacy is really important for physical security. But there is another area of physical security that I think has been very underexplored, and on-chain contract systems are probably in my mind, one of the first places where we can make some meaningful innovation in how that works in the wider world of assets in quite some time, where it's not just trust a custodian and a guy with a bigger stick. I think I think there's some innovation to be had there. So, and I imagine that to be a place for zero knowledge Stark specifically. I'll note that also on this slide, and I don't think I even mentioned, but the reason I asked this question specifically is because despite the fact that there are lots of Stark systems out there in production, there are only a few that even claim to actually be zero knowledge. So in a sort of funny way, there's this whole area of the zero knowledge space that is not actually zero knowledge. It's zero knowledge like approaches to doing data validation. And in practice, it leaks data in sort of random and unpredictable ways, literally as the result of a hash. So like if it's the wrong data, then it's just, oops, you leaked the wrong data, right? So it's on a high level, we like the academic world, the academic papers have for several years included strategies for how we could make this particular system zero knowledge. But when kind of the rubber meets the road, where these systems have actually been built, there are very few of them, and very few of them that are actually zero knowledge. And of those, they're still brand new. The only one, the only one I've identified actually had a soundness issue like last month. So literally, this is the bleeding edge for sure of the Stark space. I'm excited though. The responses just in the past couple of days, it appears that there are several Stark teams that are interested, and I wasn't sure exactly what was the holdup, sort of, because in some ways I'm watching the papers published, and I see like, okay, we've known how to make this zero knowledge since 2024 or 2023, in one case 2022. Like, okay, where is it? Where's the feature branch? And that was the purpose of the question. But I'm excited to see that there's definitely some movement, and there are several teams that have publicly said that they're interested in getting something out in early or mid 2026. So should be right in time for the May upgrade. So we're actually in a really fantastic spot to be a very early target of some of these systems.
As if we weren't doing well enough already. We're hitting a lot of good points between all of this. We're starting to run over time. I can wrap it up quickly, or if you have a little bit more time, I forgot to ask at the start, we can just briefly touch on community comment and meme of the week. How are you feeling? Are you in a rush?
I got 5 minutes or so.
Okay, all right. We don't really have time for that then.
10
Any quick message to the community if you want to just drop something?
I had a lot of rants in context, inline rants there. Yeah, I think there's a lot of distance to be had on the security side. What we was talking about there, trying to get to where Bitcoin Cash, it would definitely be a dream for Bitcoin Cash to have just unassailably better practical and physical security, including privacy, as an ecosystem, as a protective measure. It's something that we're in a good position to make happen. We have the upgrades we need, and a lot of the tech is there. So we are certainly within a year or two of a few strong teams figuring out some important pieces. And we're in a great space for that to happen. Otherwise, I'd say, message to the community. If you have any comments or statements for the chips, do please send them in. Send a pull request. The final approval requests will go out beginning of October. So way ahead of last year. Still all of the process, but we've got 2 months still for lock-in. I'm happy to answer any remaining questions. I think we're actually through any open questions now. I don't know of any remaining open questions in any forums, but do send them to me if you find one. Yes, statements, please.
All right, amazing. We got to give a quick shout out to Farouk. I hope I'm saying that correctly. He asked if I could give a shout out to PersianBitcoinCash.com, and I agreed. He said to remind people that the website is new and hasn't got many posts, but if you're a Persian speaker or interested in that, go check out PersianBitcoinCash.com. We've got our Fund Me contributors, Majamali Marcelo, Jeremy is made of whatever profits are made of, Molecular, the show we love, at Cash Stamps, Keep Building and Broaching, Erdogan Talk, Economics Writer, Big Hair, Love the Show, Love Your Hair, Milton Friedman, Purely Peer, PurelyPeer.cash, Discover the Thrill of Quest Hunting, Find Hidden Cash Drops and Collect BCH, Ryan Giffen, Keep It Up Boys, DGN and FurQ, Fresh Hardcore, BCH Rap Anthem coming at you, The Green Comeback Kids, Get It At, https://nwb.cash, and Cash Dragon, Pump It Up. Shout out to our donators and our patrons, Ricky and Kyle, and our sponsors, General Protocols. Check out bchbull.com. Obviously, you can find more about the show at bitcoincashpodcast.com. Any final shout outs from you, Jason?
Thanks for having me on. Thank you, especially to Callan for getting fantastic implementations of the chips in BCHN and painstakingly optimizing them over many months now. It was a pleasure to hack together a TempNet patch, and it didn't take much work. And that's because Callan had it all ready already. So thank you very much to Callan for pushing us forward there.
Absolute legend. Jet, any final shout outs?
Yeah, so my shout outs to you, Jason. I think I saw in the chat here, Jason the Goat. I think that is the least unique comment in the history of the podcast. I'm like, every time you're on, I feel like I see that comment come up. So shout out to you.
Thank you.
DMW27 says, I wish Bitcoin Cash had 1,000 Jasons. And that's definitely true. But I think we're lucky to have one, actually. Everybody else has 0. So we're doing good on that front. A nice infinite gain there. But I mean, talking about ZK roll-ups and all that, Starks and all that, we might have to do a podcast episode. I might see if I can try and find somebody who's an expert in that. I think that would be a really good show to do. I've certainly got my own homework cut out. I was trying to do some yesterday, but it's pretty
Yeah.
mind-boggling stuff.
Several of the
going
teams
through.
responded to that tweet, so and they're interested. They're interested in getting new developers from different ecosystems. So, yeah,
Brilliant.
I would not be surprised if one or more of them would want to do a show.
Okay, hell yeah. Well, we'll look into that. Okay, that'll do it for today. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Until next time.
Cryptonana, exit liquidity, hodl nana, dump it all. Cryptonana, exit liquidity, hodl nana, dump it all.
Cryptonana, exit liquidity,
Dump it all.
hodl nana, dump it all.
Nana, exit liquidity, hodl nana, dump it all. Cryptonana, exit liquidity, hodl nana, dump it all.
From the day we arrive on the blockchain and blinking step into the trade, there's more to lose than can never be won, more to dump than can never be saved. Influencers, tweets, and the noobs all follow, buying high, selling low at a game. But the boomers know, and Sailor, he knows that the dump is coming. It's all the same. It's the circle of exit liquidity, and it moves us all through despair and hope, through faith and FOMO, till we find our place on the path unwinding in the circle of exit liquidity. Some of us fall by the wayside, and some of us soar.